The fluorescent lights of courtroom 4D hummed overhead like a swarm of mechanical bees. Cold. Clinical. The kind of cold that seeps through wool and settles deep in your bones, no matter how many layers you're wearing. I sat in the second row of the gallery, my hands folded carefully on the lap of my navy blue dress, the same dress I'd worn to my daughter's wedding 4 years ago, back when I still believed in Brandon Coleman, back when I thought he was the answer to my prayers for Michelle's happiness. How wrong I'd been. Across the center aisle, separated by 10 feet of polished wood flooring and a chasm of betrayal, Brandon sat at the defense table. Tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. $200 haircut, precision trimmed. That practiced smile he used on real estate clients and trusting elderly mothers-in-law who were foolish enough to believe his lies. He hadn't looked at me once since entering the courtroom 20 minutes ago, but I looked at him. I studied the way his jaw tightened when the bailiff called the case number in that official monotone. CV-2024-8847, Green versus Coleman. I watched his manicured fingers drum a nervous rhythm against the mahogany table, the only visible crack in his carefully composed facade. I noticed how he shifted his weight every 30 seconds or so, like a man who desperately wanted to be anywhere else but here. Good. Let him be uncomfortable. Let him feel just a fraction of the anxiety and fear he'd inflicted on the women who'd trusted him. My lawyer, Patricia Hayes, leaned close. Her voice was barely above a whisper, mindful of the court's decorum. You ready, Elena? 62 years on this earth. 35 years as a registered nurse at Denver General Hospital, most of them working the graveyard shift. A widow for 6 years, ever since Jerome collapsed in our living room and left me to navigate this world alone. A mother to one beautiful daughter who'd had her heart broken and her bank account emptied by the man sitting across this courtroom. Was I ready? I thought about the navy blue coat, the one I'd promised Edith Marshall I'd buy her because her own son, the man who sat there in his expensive suit, had promised her the same thing and never followed through. I thought about how Edith had cried when I'd shown up at that depressing care facility with the coat in a shopping bag, tears of gratitude streaming down her wrinkled face because someone, anyone, had finally kept a promise to her. I thought about my daughter Michelle, sitting 3 rows behind me right now. I could feel her presence without turning around, could sense the nervous energy radiating from her like heat from a furnace. She'd lost 30 pounds since February, couldn't sleep without medication, had developed a tremor in her left hand that she tried to hide but that I noticed every single time we had coffee together. I thought about the $25,000 Brandon had stolen, not from me, from her, from my baby girl, from the future she'd been trying to build, one extra hospital shift at a time. Yes, I said to Patricia, keeping my voice steady and sure. I'm ready. The judge entered through the door behind the bench. We all rose as one, a choreographed movement of respect for the authority of the court. Judge Sarah Kensington swept into the room in her black robes, glasses perched on her nose, gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. A black woman in her mid-60s, just a few years older than me. She carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who'd fought her own battles to sit in that elevated chair. We sat when she sat. Brandon's lawyer, some slick downtown attorney named Richard Brennan, who probably billed $500 an hour and considered himself God's gift to the legal profession, shuffled his papers with theatrical confidence. He whispered something to Brandon, who nodded with that same false sincerity he'd used when he'd told Michelle his mother was dying and needed $25,000 for medical care. Brennan thought this would be easy. I could see it in the casual way he straightened his already straight tie, in the slight smirk that played at the corner of his mouth. An old black woman accusing her former son-in-law of fraud in civil court. His word against hers. He probably figured he'd be done by lunchtime, back in his leather office chair by 2 o'clock, celebrating another win with his paralegal. He thought wrong, because I wasn't afraid anymore. I'd spent 6 months being afraid. Afraid of making waves. Afraid of embarrassing Michelle. Afraid of what people would say about an interfering mother-in-law who couldn't mind her own business. Afraid that maybe, somehow, I was wrong about Brandon, and this was all just a terrible misunderstanding. But fear had given way to something else during those long months of preparation. Something harder. Something forged in sleepless nights and depositions and the sight of Edith Marshall sitting alone in a freezing room at Pinewood Care Center, waiting for a son who never visited. Certainty. I had something Richard Brennan and Brandon Coleman didn't expect. A paper trail 6 inches thick. bank records that told a story more damning than any witness testimony, receipts that proved line by line and dollar by dollar exactly where that $25,000 had gone. And witnesses. Oh, we had witnesses. People who would stand up in this courtroom and tell the truth about who Brandon Coleman really was beneath that expensive suit and practiced smile. Including a 77-year-old woman in a navy blue coat who was ready to tell everyone exactly what kind of son she'd raised. Judge Kensington arranged her papers, settled her glasses more firmly on her nose, and looked out at the courtroom with eyes that had seen 1,000 cases just like this one. Cases about money and lies, and families torn apart by greed. "Good morning," she said, her voice carrying effortlessly across the room. "We're here today for Green versus Coleman, case number CV-2024-8847. This is a civil action for fraud in the amount of $25,000 plus damages. Are both parties ready to proceed?" Patricia stood smoothly. "Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff is ready." Brennan rose with unnecessary flourish. "The defense is ready, Your Honor." "Very well," Judge Kensington made a note. "Before we begin, I have a ruling on the defense's motion filed yesterday to exclude testimony from Edith Marshall on grounds of mental incompetency." My heart stopped. We'd known this was coming. Brennan had filed the motion late Monday afternoon, claiming that Edith was too old and confused to be a reliable witness. Patricia had assured me it was just a stalling tactic, that no judge would exclude testimony from a competent 77-year-old woman just because the defense didn't like what she had to say. But still, my hands gripped each other tighter. Judge Kensington looked over her glasses at Brennan. "Having reviewed Mrs. Marshall's medical records, the affidavit from her primary care physician, Dr. Raymond Chen, and the sworn statement from the director of Pinewood Care Center, I find absolutely no evidence of diminished mental capacity. Mrs. Marshall is by all accounts sharp, lucid, and fully capable of providing testimony. The motion is denied." Relief flooded through me like warm water. Patricia didn't smile. She was too professional for that. But I saw her shoulders relax just slightly. Brennan's jaw tightened. He'd lost his first motion before the trial even started. "Understood, Your Honor." "Excellent." Judge Kensington folded her hands on the bench. "Then let's begin. Mr. Brennan, you may present your opening statement." Richard Brennan stood and buttoned his suit jacket in one practiced motion. He walked to the center of the courtroom like he owned it, like this was his stage and we were all just audience members waiting to be dazzled by his performance. And just like that, the trial began. The fight for my daughter's justice. The reckoning that Brandon Coleman never saw coming. The moment when an old black woman in a navy blue dress proved that underestimating her was the biggest mistake he'd ever made. I sat up straighter, kept my eyes forward, kept my hands steady. And I prepared to watch Patricia Hayes dismantle Brandon Coleman's lies, one receipt at a time. My name is Elena Rose Green, and I've spent 35 years putting broken people back together. Not the glamorous kind of nursing you see on television shows, where the doctors are beautiful and the nurses wear pristine scrubs and everything works out in exactly 42 minutes. I'm talking about the real kind, the 3 a.m. kind, when someone codes and you're doing chest compressions until your arms shake and sweat runs down your back despite the frigid air conditioning. The holding a dying man's hand while his family drives through a snowstorm kind, because nobody should die alone if you can help it. The cleaning up bodily fluids and telling scared people everything will be okay kind, even when you're not entirely sure it will be. I worked the night shift at Denver General Hospital for most of those 35 years. Started when I was 27, fresh out of nursing school and so naive I thought I could save everyone. Learned pretty quickly that you can't, but you keep trying anyway because what else are you going to do? You show up. You do the work. You hold the line between chaos and order for 12 hours at a time. I'd come home at 7 a.m. when everyone else was just starting their day. My husband Jerome would already be up, coffee made, kiss on my cheek, asking how my shift went like he always did. I'd sleep until early afternoon, wake up and try to feel like a normal human being for a few hours, then head back to the hospital for another night. 12-hour shifts, 3 or 4 nights a week, for 3.5 decades. Jerome used to joke that I ran on coffee and stubbornness in equal measure. He wasn't wrong. My husband died 6 years ago this past March. Massive heart attack at 58 years old. One minute he was sitting in his recliner laughing at something stupid on the television. I can't even remember what show it was anymore. And the next minute he was clutching his chest, eyes wide with confusion and fear. By the time the paramedics got there, he was gone. Just like that. 32 years of marriage, ended in the time it takes to dial 911. People think nurses handle death better because we see it all the time at work. We don't. We just get better at hiding the hurt, at putting on our professional face and doing what needs to be done. But when it's your person, your partner, the man who made you coffee every single morning for 3 decades, there's no professional face that fits over that kind of grief. After Jerome passed, it was just me and Michelle, my baby girl, 29 years old at the time, already a registered nurse herself over at St. Joseph's Hospital, following in her mama's footsteps, working the emergency room, which I'd always said was even harder than the general floors because you never knew what was coming through those doors. Could be a kid with a broken arm or a gunshot victim bleeding out on your gurney. But Michelle was good at it. Great at it, actually. She had Jerome's calm temperament and my stubborn refusal to give up on people. The perfect combination for emergency medicine. She became my whole world after Jerome died. We'd have coffee together twice a week, her schedule permitting, and she'd tell me about the crazy cases in the ER, and I'd tell her about the characters on my floor at Denver General. We'd laugh about the things you have to laugh about in medicine, otherwise you'd cry all the time. We'd talk about Jerome, keeping his memory alive between the two of us. I wasn't lonely exactly. I had work. I had Michelle. I had my church group on Sunday mornings and my neighbor Doris who'd come over for tea every Thursday afternoon. But there was an emptiness in my house that hadn't been there before. A silence that felt heavy. So when Michelle called me in November 3 years ago and asked if she could bring someone to Thanksgiving dinner, a man she'd been seeing for a few months, I said yes immediately. Of course, yes. Bring him. I'd love to meet him. And that's how Brandon Coleman walked into our lives. Thanksgiving 2021. I remember it like it was yesterday. I'd been cooking since Tuesday, preparing all of Jerome's favorite dishes because that's what we always did. Honey glazed ham, cornbread dressing with sage, collard greens simmered low and slow with smoked turkey necks, sweet potato casserole with the marshmallow topping, pecan pie from scratch. The house smelled like love and memory. Michelle arrived at 2 o'clock with Brandon Coleman in tow. He was 33 at the time, tall and good-looking in that clean-cut all-American way, khaki pants and a navy sweater. Perfect hair, perfect smile. He carried a bottle of wine that probably cost more than I'd spend on groceries in a week, though I didn't know that at the time. "Mom," Michelle said, practically glowing with happiness. "This is Brandon. Brandon, this is my mother, Elena Green." He shook my hand with just the right amount of firmness, made eye contact. "Mrs. Green, it's such a pleasure to meet you. Michelle talks about you constantly." "Please call me Elena," I said, smiling. Come in. Dinner's almost ready." We sat around my dining room table, the same table where Jerome and I had eaten thousands of meals, where we'd helped Michelle with her homework, where we'd celebrated birthdays and holidays and ordinary Tuesdays. Brandon sat in Jerome's old seat, though he didn't know that's what it was. Something about seeing him there made my chest tight, but I pushed the feeling down. Brandon was charming. So charming it almost felt rehearsed, but I told myself I was being paranoid. He asked intelligent questions about my work at Denver General, complimented my cooking with specific details. "This cornbread dressing is incredible. The sage really brings out the flavor." That showed he was paying attention. He told funny stories about difficult real estate clients without being mean-spirited. He was attentive to Michelle, refilling her water glass without being asked, touching her hand gently when she talked. He seemed perfect. Too perfect, whispered a voice in the back of my mind. The same voice that had helped me spot sepsis before the labs came back, that had warned me when a patient was about to crash. The instinct you develop after decades of reading people in their most vulnerable moments. But I ignored that whisper. Because Michelle was happy, really, genuinely happy in a way I hadn't seen since her father died. She laughed at Brandon's jokes. She leaned into him when he put his arm around her shoulders. She looked at him the way I used to look at Jerome. And I wanted that for my daughter more than I wanted to trust my gut. After dinner, Brandon helped me clear the table while Michelle loaded the dishwasher. He insisted on washing the serving dishes by hand, said his mother had taught him that good guests don't leave hosts with work to do. "Your mother raised you right," I said, drying a casserole dish. "She tried her best," he replied, his voice going soft. "It was just the two of us for most of my childhood. My father left when I was 7. She worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat." That must have been hard. It was, but it taught me the value of family, of taking care of the people you love. He looked at me directly. I want you to know, Elena, I care about Michelle very much. I'm not going to hurt her. The sincerity in his eyes was so convincing that I believed him completely. I'm glad to hear that, I said. She deserves someone who'll treat her right. She does, and I promise you, I will. That promise turned out to be worth exactly nothing, but I didn't know that yet. Over the next year, Brandon became part of our family. He'd come to Sunday dinners at my house, always bringing wine or flowers. He attended Michelle's work events as her +1. When she got promoted to senior ER nurse, he took us both out to celebrate at a steakhouse downtown. On Michelle's 30th birthday, he proposed, got down on one knee in my living room, right there in front of me, and asked her to marry him with a diamond ring that looked expensive enough to make me wince. Michelle cried and said yes, and I cried too, because my daughter was engaged, and Jerome wasn't here to see it. Brandon pulled me into the hug afterward. Thank you for welcoming me into your family, Elena. It means everything to me. I hugged him back. Welcome to the family, son. The wedding was beautiful. Small ceremony, just 60 people, at a little chapel in Cherry Creek. Michelle wore my grandmother's veil, cream-colored lace that had been passed down through 3 generations of green women. I'd worn it when I married Jerome. My mother had worn it when she married my father, and now Michelle wore it to marry Brandon Coleman. She looked radiant, absolutely radiant. Brandon looked perfect in his tuxedo, said all the right things during his vows, even cried a little when Michelle walked down the aisle to Pachelbel's Canon, which I'd specifically requested because it was Jerome's favorite. I sat in the front row and believed every word Brandon spoke. I promised to love you in sickness and in health, to cherish you in good times and bad, to be faithful to you all the days of my life. Lies, every single word, but I didn't know that yet. After the ceremony, Brandon pulled me aside in the reception hall. We stood near the windows overlooking the garden where the photographer was taking pictures of Michelle with her bridesmaids. He took both my hands in his. Elena, I want to thank you for trusting me with Michelle, for accepting me into your family. I know I can never replace your husband, but I promise you, I swear to you, I will take care of your daughter. You don't have to worry anymore. I squeezed his hands. I know you will, Brandon. I can see how much you love her. He smiled that perfect smile, more than anything in the world. I believed him. God help me, I believed every word. The first year of their marriage seemed good from the outside. They bought a small house in Highlands Ranch. Nothing fancy, but nice enough. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a little backyard. Brandon's real estate career was taking off, he said. Big commissions, important clients. The future looked bright. Michelle picked up extra shifts at St. Joseph's to help with the mortgage payments. She'd call me sometimes after working a double, her voice exhausted but happy. It's worth it, Mom. We're building something together. I'd drive over every Sunday for dinner. It became our new tradition. Michelle would cook. She'd learned from watching me all those years, and Brandon would pour wine and tell stories about his week. Difficult clients who wanted million-dollar houses on studio apartment budgets. Last-minute deals that fell through. Success stories that ended with big commission checks. We'd sit around their dining room table, the 3 of us, and it felt like family. Like everything I'd hoped for Michelle after Jerome died. A partner, a home, a future. I remember one Sunday in particular, October 2 years ago. The leaves on the trees in their backyard were turning gold and red. Michelle had made pot roast, Jerome's absolute favorite, with carrots and potatoes and that rich gravy he'd loved. We ate and talked and laughed, and when dinner was finished, Brandon raised his wine glass. To family, he said, looking at both of us. To the people who matter most. Michelle raised her glass. I raised mine. We clinked them together. To family, we echoed. And I thought, maybe I was wrong about that whisper of doubt. Maybe Brandon really is exactly what he appears to be. Maybe my daughter has found what Jerome and I had, a true partner for life. That was 14 months ago, before I knew about Amber Wright, before I knew about the $25,000. Before I knew that the man sitting across from me, smiling and toasting to family, was systematically destroying my daughter's life while I sat there oblivious and trusting. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about Edith Marshall, because that's where everything started to unravel. That's where the lies finally began to crack open and show the rot underneath. January 15th, 2024. A Tuesday. The date is burned into my memory like a scar. I just finished one of those shifts that reminds you why nursing has the highest burnout rate of any profession. 12 hours that felt like 24. 3 code blues, 2 saves, 1 loss. The loss was a 23-year-old kid who'd overdosed on fentanyl-laced pills he'd bought thinking they were just pain medication. I'd done compressions until my arms shook, but his heart never started again. We'd called his mother at 4 a.m. I'd held her while she sobbed in the hallway outside his room, her whole body shaking with grief that would never fully heal. By 7 a.m., when my shift ended, I was exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. Soul tired. The kind of tired that makes you question everything about your chosen profession, about whether you're actually helping anyone, or just bearing witness to an endless parade of suffering. I should have driven straight home, should have taken a hot shower, climbed into bed, and slept for 10 hours. But something made me stop at Pinewood Care Center instead. I don't know why. Maybe it was God. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was just the memory of a conversation I'd had with Brandon 2 months earlier, over Christmas dinner at Michelle and Brandon's house. We'd been sitting in their living room after the meal, full of turkey and dressing, and I'd asked casually, "How's your mother doing, Brandon?" Michelle mentioned she's been having some health issues. His face had transformed immediately. Concern, worry, sadness, all the right emotions, perfectly displayed. "Not great, to be honest," he'd said, his voice heavy. "She's been having heart problems, palpitations, chest pain. The doctors say she needs constant monitoring, but the facility she's in now isn't really equipped for that level of care." "Oh, I'm so sorry. That must be scary for you." "It is." He'd looked at Michelle, reached for her hand. "Actually, I've been meaning to talk to you both about something. Can we talk after Michelle finishes putting away the leftovers?" 20 minutes later, Michelle had come to find me in the kitchen where I was drying dishes. Her face was troubled. "Mom, Brandon needs to ask us something. It's about his mother." We'd sat back down in the living room. Brandon had that serious, vulnerable expression that made you want to help him. "The doctors are recommending we move my mother to a cardiac care facility," he'd explained. "Somewhere with 24-hour monitoring, specialized staff, all the equipment she might need. But it's expensive. Really expensive." "How expensive?" I'd asked. He'd named a figure that made my stomach drop. "For the first year, they're estimating around $25,000 after insurance. I've been trying to save up, but with the mortgage and everything..." He'd trailed off, looking genuinely distressed. Michelle had squeezed his hand. "We'll figure it out, honey." That's when Brandon had looked at her with those sincere eyes and said, "Actually, I was hoping, I know it's a lot to ask, but you have that money saved up, your nest egg. I would never normally ask, but it's my mother, and I'm terrified of what might happen if we don't." "Of course," Michelle had interrupted him. "Of course we'll use it. She's family. We'll make it work." I'd felt that whisper of doubt again, that same instinct that had made me uncomfortable at Thanksgiving dinner 2 years earlier. "Are you sure?" I'd asked Michelle later when Brandon had gone to the bathroom. "That's your entire savings, all $25,000. You've been saving that money for years." "I know, Mom, but it's for his mother. She needs help. What else are we supposed to do?" I'd wanted to say, wait, verify, ask to see the medical bills, talk to the doctors yourself. Don't just hand over $25,000 because someone asks for it, even if that someone is your husband. But I'd also lost my own mother to inadequate medical care 20 years ago. I knew what it felt like to wish you'd done more, spent more, fought harder to get her the treatment she needed. So instead I'd said, "If you're sure, baby, if you trust him." "I do, Mom. I trust him completely." She'd written the check the next day. January 3rd, 2024, $25,000.00, made out to Brandon Coleman. Memo line, for Mom's medical care. She'd shown me a photo of the check before she gave it to him, proud that she could help, happy to be doing something meaningful with her hard-earned savings. I'd looked at that check and felt my stomach turn, though I couldn't have said exactly why. Now, 12 days later, I sat in my car outside Pinewood Care Center on Peoria Street in Aurora, Colorado, and that whisper of doubt had become a roar. $25,000 for specialized cardiac care, for a better facility with 24-hour monitoring, But Pinewood Care Center wasn't specialized. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't the kind of place you'd move someone who needed intensive medical care. It was a basic assisted living facility, the kind that accepted Medicaid. The kind where rent was $1,200 a month and you were lucky if someone checked on you twice a day. Something was wrong. Very, very wrong. I got out of my car. The January air was cold enough to make my breath visible in white puffs. The parking lot was half empty, just a few old sedans and one rusted pickup truck. The building itself was a low brick structure that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. Faded siding, cracked sidewalk. A sign near the entrance that read, Pinewood Care Center, a safe place for seniors, in letters that had once been gold but had faded to a dingy yellow. This was where Brandon's mother lived. This was the facility that supposedly required $25,000. I walked inside. The lobby of Pinewood Care Center smelled like institutional disinfectant, trying unsuccessfully to mask the odors of old building, overcooked vegetables, and human decline. Beige linoleum floors, fluorescent lighting that cast everything in a sickly greenish tint. A fake potted plant in the corner that was so dusty I could see it from across the room. A receptionist sat behind a scratched plexiglass window, barely looking up from her phone as I approached. She was maybe 25, wearing purple scrubs with cartoon characters on them, one earbud still in her ear. "Help you?" she asked, not making eye contact. "I'm here to visit Edith Marshall," I said. "Room 14. "Sign in." She pushed a clipboard toward me through the slot in the plexiglass. I signed my name, noted the time, 7:47 a.m., and wrote family friend in the relationship column. The receptionist glanced at the clipboard with complete disinterest. "Down that hall, second door on the left. Visiting hours technically don't start until 9, but whatever." "Thank you." I walked down the narrow corridor, my nursing shoes squeaking slightly on the linoleum. The walls were painted that specific shade of institutional beige that's supposed to be calming, but just makes everything feel lifeless. A few residents' doors were open. I glimpsed a woman sitting motionless in a wheelchair, staring at a television. An old man shuffled past me using a walker, moving so slowly it hurt to watch. This was not a $25,000 facility. This was barely a $1,200 a month facility. Room 14 had a handwritten nameplate next to the door, E. Marshall, in shaky cursive. I knocked gently, my heart pounding for reasons I couldn't fully articulate yet. "Come in," called a thin, wavering voice. I opened the door. The room was tiny, maybe 10 feet by 12 feet. A single bed with a faded floral comforter that had been washed so many times the pattern was barely visible. A wooden dresser with a few framed photographs on top. I could see a young boy who must have been Brandon, maybe 8 or 9 years old, grinning at the camera with a gap-toothed smile. A small television on a rolling cart, the kind hospitals retired 15 years ago. A worn armchair positioned by the window. And in that armchair sat Edith Marshall. She was so much smaller than I'd expected. Maybe 5 feet tall, couldn't have weighed more than 90 pounds. White hair pulled back in a thin bun. Her face was deeply lined, the kind of wrinkles that come from hard living rather than gentle aging. She wore an oversized cardigan, navy blue I noticed, over a simple house dress. The cardigan had holes in both elbows, and she'd pulled it tight around herself, despite the fact that it was barely doing anything to keep out the cold. Because the room was cold. I could feel it immediately, maybe 65 degrees, which is dangerous for elderly people. I glanced at the baseboard heater. The control knob was missing. "Mrs. Marshall?" I said softly, stepping into the room. She looked up at me with pale blue eyes that were still sharp despite her age. Wary, confused. "Yes? Do I know you?" "No, ma'am. My name is Elena Green. I'm Michelle's mother." Her entire face transformed. Wariness melted into surprise, then something that looked like relief mixed with joy. "Michelle's mother?" She pressed one gnarled hand to her chest. "Oh my goodness. Elena, Brandon's mother-in-law. Please sit down." She gestured to the edge of her bed, the only other seating option in the room. I sat, trying to keep my professional nurse's face in place while my mind cataloged everything wrong with this situation. The cold room, the broken heater, the thin blanket, the holes in her cardigan, the institutional furniture that had seen better decades. "It's so wonderful to meet you," Edith continued, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "I've heard so much about you from Michelle. How kind you are. What a wonderful nurse. How you helped raise such a beautiful daughter. You talk to Michelle often? I asked carefully. A shadow crossed her face. Well, no, not as often as I'd like. She calls sometimes, but Brandon told me. She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. He said it's better if I don't answer, that it would upset her to know how I'm really doing. So I let it go to voicemail mostly. My stomach clenched. He told you not to talk to your daughter-in-law? He said he didn't want to worry her, that she has enough stress with her job. Edith's fingers plucked at the hem of her cardigan nervously. Is she okay? Michelle, is something wrong? She's fine, I said, though it wasn't entirely true. Mrs. Marshall, I actually came here because I wanted to check on you myself, to see how you're doing. That's very sweet of you, dear. I'm managing, as well as can be expected at 77. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. This isn't the fanciest place, but it's clean and safe. The staff are kind when they have time to be. I took a breath. Mrs. Marshall, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Can you do that? She nodded slowly, those sharp eyes studying my face. Your health. Brandon told Michelle and me that you've been having serious heart problems, palpitations, chest pain, that you needed to be moved to a specialized cardiac care facility with constant monitoring. Edith blinked at me. Heart problems? Yes. He said the doctors recommended specialized care, that the medical bills were going to be substantial. She shook her head slowly. Elena, I don't have heart problems. I have high blood pressure, have had it for 20 years, and some arthritis in my hands and knees. But that's it. My doctor gives me prescriptions for lisinopril and ibuprofen. That's all I take. The room seemed to tilt slightly. No heart condition, I repeated, needing to hear it again. No, dear? Nothing like that? Just the normal complaints of being old. She looked genuinely confused now. Why would Brandon say that? I pressed my hands together to stop them from shaking. How much do your medications cost, Mrs. Marshall? Oh, not much at all. Maybe $30 a month? My Medicare Part D covers most of it. $30 a month, not $25,000. And this facility, Pinewood, how much is your rent here? $1,200 a month. It's manageable with my Social Security check. I get $1,420 a month, so after rent I have enough left over for food and personal items. She gestured around the sparse room. It's not fancy, but it's what I can afford. Has Brandon been helping you financially? Sending you money for anything? Edith's face fell. The hope and joy from earlier drained away, replaced by something that looked like shame mixed with sadness. No, she said quietly. He hasn't sent money. Has he visited you recently? She looked down at her hands. Not since last July. 7 months ago. He came for about an hour, said he'd been very busy with work. He promised to come back the following week, but... She trailed off. He didn't, I finished for her. No, he calls sometimes, usually very brief. How are you, Mom? I'm fine, son. Good. I'll talk to you soon. Then he's gone. She looked up at me, and I saw tears forming in those pale blue eyes. I know he's busy. Real estate is demanding, and he has Michelle to think about now. I don't want to be a burden. My heart broke for this woman. This tiny, lonely woman sitting in a cold room, making excuses for a son who'd abandoned her. Mrs. Marshall, Edith, you're not a burden. You could never be a burden. You're kind to say so. I stood up, walked to the window. The view overlooked the parking lot and a chain-link fence beyond it. Nothing beautiful, nothing hopeful, just concrete and cars and the gray January sky. Edith, I need to tell you something. In late December, Brandon told Michelle that you needed expensive medical care. He said he needed $25,000 to move you to a better facility and pay for treatments. I heard her sharp intake of breath behind me. Michelle gave him that money, all of her savings, every penny she'd been saving for years. She gave it to him on January 3rd because we both believed, that you needed help. Oh no. Edith's voice was barely a whisper. Oh no, no, no. I turned back to face her. She had both hands pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. I didn't know, she said through her fingers. I had no idea he would... Oh, that poor girl, her savings, all of it. None of it came to you? Not a penny. Elena, I swear to you, I didn't know anything about this. I believed her. Every instinct I had. The same instinct that had whispered warnings about Brandon from the beginning told me this woman was telling the truth. "I know you didn't," I said gently. I sat back down on the edge of the bed. "Edith, where did you get that cardigan you're wearing?" She looked down at it, confused by the question. "This? I've had it for years. It was my sister's originally. She passed in 2019 and left me some of her clothes. The elbows are worn out, but it's still warm." "Did Brandon promise to buy you a new winter coat?" Her face crumpled completely. "Last Christmas, when he called. I mentioned that my old coat's zipper was broken, that I was having trouble staying warm when I went outside. He said not to worry, that he'd buy me a new one, navy blue, like this cardigan. He said he'd bring it the next time he visited. But he never did." "No." The word came out as barely more than a breath. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, opened the Notes app, started typing. "What are you doing?" Edith asked. "Taking notes, because I'm going to make sure Michelle knows the truth about where her money went, and then we're going to figure out what to do about it. Elena, I don't want to cause trouble between them. Brandon is my son. I love him, even if he's—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Even if he's neglecting you, lying to his wife, stealing from her?" She flinched at the word stealing, but didn't argue. I finished typing my notes, took several photos of the room, the broken heater, the thin blanket, the worn furniture. Edith watched me, but didn't protest. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I'm so sorry Michelle got hurt because of my son." I stopped what I was doing and looked at this tiny, forgotten woman who was apologizing for someone else's sins. "Edith Marshall, you listen to me. None of this is your fault. Not one bit. Your son made these choices. He lied. He manipulated. He stole. Those are his actions, not yours. But if I'd been a better mother—" "Stop." My voice was firm but not unkind. "I raised a daughter too. I know how much we blame ourselves for our children's choices. But at some point they're adults. They make their own decisions. And they're responsible for the consequences." She nodded slowly, wiping at her tears with the sleeve of that worn cardigan. I stood up. "I need to go talk to Michelle, but I'm going to come back and visit you if that's okay." "I'd like that very much. And Edith, don't tell Brandon I was here, not yet. Can you do that for me?" She nodded. "I won't say anything." I walked to the door, then paused and turned back. "One more question. Last Christmas, when Brandon promised you that coat, navy blue, did he say anything else? Any other promises?" Edith thought for a moment. "He said things were going well with his business, that he'd gotten a big commission, that he was going to take better care of me from now on." Her voice broke on the last words. I believed him. "Of course you did. He's your son." I left Pinewood Care Center at 8:30 a.m., sat in my car in that depressing parking lot and stared at the photos on my phone. Edith's cold room, her thin blanket, her worn cardigan with holes in the elbows. $25,000. Brandon had taken $25,000 from Michelle, claiming it was for his mother's medical care. And his mother was sitting in a $1,200 a month facility, paying her own rent with Social Security, wearing a dead sister's old cardigan, waiting for a winter coat her son had promised but never delivered. Where had the money gone? I called Michelle, got her voicemail. She was probably sleeping after her own night shift. "Baby, it's Mom. I need to talk to you as soon as possible. It's important. Call me when you wake up. I love you." Then I started my car and drove home, my mind racing through everything I'd just learned. My daughter had been lied to, stolen from, manipulated by a man who'd looked her in the eye and fabricated an entire medical crisis. And I was going to make sure she knew the truth, even if it broke her heart. Michelle called me back at 2:15 that afternoon. I'd been sitting at my kitchen table for the past 3 hours, unable to sleep despite my exhaustion, going over and over what I was going to say. "Hey, Mom. Sorry I missed your call. I was dead to the world. What's up? Can you come over? I need to talk to you about something. Is everything okay? You sound weird. Just come over, baby. Please. Okay, you're scaring me now. I'll be there in 30 minutes. She arrived in 25, still in her pajama pants and a Denver Broncos sweatshirt, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. No makeup, dark circles under her eyes that spoke to too many shifts and not enough sleep. My beautiful daughter, working herself to exhaustion while her husband spent her savings on God knew what. "Mom, what's going on?" she asked before she'd even fully stepped through my front door. "Are you sick? Is something wrong?" Sit down, Michelle. You're really freaking me out. Please, just sit. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where we'd had 1,000 conversations over the years, where I'd helped her with algebra homework in middle school, where we'd planned her wedding, where we'd cried together after Jerome's funeral. I took her hands in mine. This morning after my shift, I went to visit Edith. Michelle blinked. Brandon's mom? Why? Because something's been bothering me ever since Christmas. Since Brandon asked you for that $25,000? Her face shifted slightly, defensive. Mom, we talked about this. His mother needed help. Did she? What kind of question is that? A fair one. Michelle, when's the last time you actually spoke to Edith? She pulled her hands back, crossed her arms. I don't know. A few months ago? Brandon said she prefers to rest, that phone calls tire her out. That's not true. How would you know? Because I spent an hour with her this morning, in her room at Pinewood Care Center. Michelle stared at me. You went to see her without telling me? Yes, and I'm glad I did because I learned some very interesting things. I pulled out my phone, opened my notes. Edith Marshall does not have a heart condition. She has high blood pressure, managed with a $30 a month prescription. She hasn't seen a doctor about any cardiac issues. That can't be right. Brandon said. Brandon lied. I showed her the photos on my phone. This is her room. $1,200 a month, paid for with her Social Security. No specialized care, no monitoring, just a basic assisted living facility with broken heating and worn-out furniture. Michelle looked at the photos, her face going pale. There's more, I continued. Brandon hasn't visited his mother since July, 7 months ago. He calls occasionally, but tells her not to answer when you call because it would upset you to know how she's doing. He told her not to talk to me? Yes, and last Christmas he promised to buy her a winter coat, navy blue, because her old one is broken. He never did. She's been making do with a cardigan that has holes in the elbows. I could see it happening in real time, the crumbling of Michelle's carefully constructed belief system, the foundation she'd built her marriage on developing cracks. Mom, there has to be an explanation. Maybe he moved her to Pinewood temporarily while he looked for a better place. Maybe the money is sitting in an account waiting. For what, Michelle? It's been 12 days since you gave him that money. 12 days. If he was going to move her to a better facility, don't you think he would have done it by now? She stood up abruptly, started pacing my kitchen. You don't understand. Brandon loves his mother. He told me stories about how she sacrificed everything for him. He wouldn't just abandon her. Then where's the money? I don't know. Maybe he's paying for treatments you didn't see. Maybe there are bills I don't know about. Michelle, I stood up too, walked over to her. Baby, listen to yourself. You're making excuses for him. Because you've never liked him. Her voice rose, sharp with defensiveness and fear. From the beginning, you've been looking for reasons to distrust him. That's not true. Yes, it is. You never thought he was good enough for me. You've been waiting for him to screw up so you could say I told you so. The accusation stung because there was a tiny kernel of truth in it. I had been worried from the beginning, but not because I wanted to be right, because I wanted my daughter to be safe. Michelle, I went to see Edith because I love you, because something didn't add up about that $25,000, and I was right to be suspicious. You went behind my back. To protect you. I don't need protecting. I'm 35 years old, Mom. I have a career, a husband, a life. When are you going to stop treating me like a child? When you stop acting like one. The words came out harsher than I'd intended. Michelle's face flushed red. Get out. What? You heard me. Get out of my business. Stay out of my marriage. I don't want to hear another word about Brandon or his mother or the money or any of it. Baby, please. No. She grabbed her purse from where she'd dropped it on the counter. I asked Brandon for help with his mother because I love him and I wanted to help his family. If you can't respect that, if you can't trust my judgment, then maybe we need some space. Michelle, I mean it, Mom. I need you to back off. Stop investigating my husband. Stop going to see his mother without telling me. Just stop. She headed for the door. What if I'm right? I called after her. What if he did lie to you? She paused with her hand on the doorknob, her back to me. Then I'll deal with it myself, like an adult. The door closed behind her. Not slammed. That would have been easier somehow. Just closed. quiet and final. I stood in my kitchen and felt the tears come. Tears of frustration and fear, and a mother's helpless rage at watching her child walk toward danger and being powerless to stop her. But underneath the tears was something harder, something that had been forming since I'd sat in Edith Marshall's cold room and realized the depth of Brandon Coleman's deception. Determination. Michelle might not be ready to face the truth yet, but I was going to make damn sure she couldn't ignore it forever. I was going to find out exactly where that $25,000 went. And then I was going to make Brandon Coleman pay for what he'd done to my daughter. I gave Michelle 2 weeks. 2 weeks of radio silence. 2 weeks of hoping she'd call, that she'd start asking her own questions, that she'd see through Brandon's lies on her own. She didn't call. So on February 1st, I took matters into my own hands. Patricia Hayes worked out of a small office on Spear Boulevard in downtown Denver. I'd met her 6 years ago when she'd come into Denver General with a broken arm from a car accident. Some idiot had run a red light and T-boned her at an intersection. I'd been her nurse during the 4-hour wait for the orthopedic surgeon, and we'd talked to keep her mind off the pain. She'd told me about her work as an attorney specializing in family law and financial fraud cases, about being a black woman in a profession that still didn't have enough of us, about raising 2 sons as a single mother while building her practice from nothing. We'd stayed in touch after she was discharged. Christmas cards. The occasional coffee when our schedules aligned. She was good people, smart, fierce, and deeply committed to helping people who'd been screwed over by the system or by someone they trusted. If anyone could help me, it was Patricia. Her office was on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better decades, but was clean and professional. The waiting room had comfortable chairs, law journals on the coffee table, and framed degrees on the wall. Howard University undergrad, Harvard Law. The receptionist, a young Latino man with excellent posture, smiled when I walked in. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to see Patricia Hayes. I don't have an appointment, but if she has a few minutes, I'd really appreciate it. Tell her it's Elena Green from Denver General." He picked up the phone, spoke quietly into it, then nodded at me. "She says come on back, 2nd door on the right." Patricia's office was exactly what I'd expected. Organized chaos. Files stacked neatly on every available surface. 2 computer monitors on her desk, a wall of law books, photos of her sons at various ages, high school graduation, college, one in military dress uniform. Patricia herself sat behind her desk in a crisp white blouse and navy blazer, her hair in natural curls, reading glasses perched on her nose. She was 54, I knew, but looked a decade younger. She stood when I entered, came around the desk to hug me. "Elena Green, it's been too long. How are you?" "I've been better, Patricia." Her expression shifted immediately from friendly to professional concern. "Sit down. Tell me what's going on." So I did. I told her everything. About Brandon. About the $25,000. About my visit to Edith at Pinewood Care Center. About the broken heater and the worn cardigan and the navy blue coat that was never purchased. About Michelle's refusal to believe her husband could lie to her. Patricia listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes on a legal pad. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me over her reading glasses. "Elena, what you're describing is textbook fraud, obtaining money under false pretenses. If we can prove Brandon solicited that $25,000 specifically for his mother's medical care and then used it for other purposes, that's a civil and potentially criminal matter. Can we prove it? Possibly. We'd need bank records showing where the money went after Michelle transferred it to him. We'd need testimony from Edith about her actual medical situation. We'd need to establish a pattern of deception." She tapped her pen against the legal pad. "The question is, what do you want to do about it?" "I want Michelle to see the truth." "And if she still refuses to believe it?" I'd been thinking about this for 2 weeks. "Then I want to file a lawsuit. On her behalf if possible, on my own if not. I want Brandon Coleman to face consequences for what he's done." Patricia leaned back in her chair, studying me. "Civil litigation is expensive, Elena, and it's not fast. We're talking months, maybe over a year. Discovery, depositions, court dates, and there's no guarantee we'd win. But there's a chance? If the evidence is as clear as you say, yes, a good chance. Then I want to try." She nodded slowly. "Okay, here's what we'd need to do first. Get Michelle's permission to access her bank records and the documentation of the transfer. Without her cooperation, we can't build a case. And if she won't cooperate, then we wait until she's ready, until something happens that makes her see what you already see. I left Patricia's office with a retainer agreement and a sense of purpose. She was taking the case pro bono. "You helped me when I was in pain," she'd said. "Now I help you," which was a blessing because I couldn't have afforded her hourly rate on a nurse's salary. Now I just needed Michelle to wake up. That happened sooner than I expected, but in a way I never could have predicted. The call came at 3:17 a.m. on February 14th, Valentine's Day. I was working my shift at Denver General, finishing up paperwork at the nurse's station, when my personal phone lit up with Michelle's name. My heart immediately jumped into my throat. A 3 a.m. call was never good news. "Michelle? Baby, what's wrong?" "Mom." Her voice was strange, flat, empty. "I need you to come over." "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" "I'm fine, physically. Just, can you come, please?" "I'm at work, but I'll call in a replacement. I can be there in an hour." "Thank you." She hung up. I found my charge nurse, explained I had a family emergency, and left the hospital at 3:45 a.m. Drove to Highlands Ranch, breaking probably half a dozen traffic laws in my urgency to get to my daughter. Michelle's house was dark except for one light in the living room. Her car was in the driveway. Brandon's wasn't. She answered the door before I could knock, still in pajamas, face swollen from crying, eyes red and hollow. "Baby, what happened?" She didn't answer, just turned and walked back into the house. I followed her into the living room. The coffee table was covered in papers, photographs, printouts of what looked like bank statements. "I hired someone," Michelle said, her voice still that terrible flat monotone. "A private investigator. 2 weeks ago, after our fight. I wanted to prove you wrong." She picked up one of the photographs, handed it to me. It showed Brandon and a woman, young, maybe 30, with long dark hair. They were standing in a parking lot, his arm around her waist. She was laughing. He was looking at her with an expression that made my stomach turn, the same expression he'd given Michelle on their wedding day. "Her name is Amber Wright," Michelle continued. "She works at his office, Coldwell Banker. According to the investigator, they've been together for over a year." She handed me another photo. Brandon and the same woman at a restaurant, holding hands across the table. Another photo. Brandon fastening a necklace around the woman's neck, a necklace that sparkled with diamonds. "That's a receipt from Trice Jewelers," Michelle said, pointing to one of the papers on the table. "January 10th. 1 diamond pendant necklace, 1.5 carats, $3,847. Her voice cracked on the number. "Paid for with our joint credit card, the same card linked to our joint account. The account I transferred the $25,000 into." I sat down on the couch next to my daughter, careful not to disturb the careful arrangement of evidence she'd laid out like an autopsy of her marriage. "There's more," Michelle said, her voice still that horrible monotone that scared me more than tears would have. She picked up a hotel receipt. "St. Regis Aspen Resort, January 14th through 18th. 4 nights, $1,350. She laid it down precisely, then picked up a printout of what looked like a social media post. A woman, Amber, standing on a snow-covered balcony, mountains in the background, holding champagne. The caption read, "Living my best life." The location tag, St. Regis Aspen Resort. The date, January 4th, 2024. "He told me he was going to San Diego," Michelle whispered. "A real estate conference, January 14th through 18th. He showed me the conference website. He called me every night from his hotel room to say goodnight." She picked up another receipt. "Capitol Grill, February 2nd, $287 for dinner. Our credit card." Another receipt. "Matsuhisa Aspen, $340. Our credit card." Another. "Cherry Creek Shopping Center, estimated $1,200 across multiple stores. Our credit card." She spread them out like a card dealer showing a losing hand. The investigator tracked $11,624 in 2 months. Jewelry, trips, dinners, shopping. All of it spent on her. All of it from the account where I deposited the $25,000 for his dying mother. The last 2 words dripped with venom. I reached for her hand, but she pulled away. Not angry, just numb. Beyond anger, In that terrible place where you've been hurt so badly that your nervous system shuts down to protect itself. I confronted him tonight, she continued. He came home at 11, late showing with a difficult client. He smelled like perfume that wasn't mine. What did he say? At first, he denied everything, said the photos were taken out of context, that Amber was just a colleague, that the investigator was lying. She laughed, a sound with no humor in it. Then I showed him the credit card statements, the bank records, the exact dates and times and dollar amounts. And Michelle's face crumpled for just a second before she forced it back to neutral. He said he never loved me, that I was convenient, that he needed someone with a steady income and good credit because he was drowning in debt. $15,000 in credit cards he'd maxed out before we even got married. My hands clenched into fists. Where is he now? I told him to get out. He's at a hotel, or with her. I don't know. I don't care. She looked at me finally, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Not just hurt, not just betrayal. Mom, you were right. About everything. And I threw you out of my house. I told you to stay out of my life. I chose him over you. Baby. I gave him $25,000, my entire savings, for a medical emergency that didn't exist, while his mother sat in a room with a broken heater wearing a cardigan with holes in it. Her voice broke. How could I be so stupid? I pulled her into my arms then, and she finally let herself break, sobbed into my shoulder with the kind of crying that comes from your soul, the kind that physically hurts. You weren't stupid, I said fiercely. You loved him. You trusted him. That's not stupidity. That's what marriage is supposed to be. But I should have seen it. The signs were all there. He lied to you. He manipulated you. He's a con artist, Michelle. A very good one. This isn't your fault. We sat there on her couch, surrounded by evidence of her husband's betrayal, while the sky outside slowly lightened from black to gray to the pale pink of dawn. Finally, around 6 a.m., Michelle pulled away and wiped her face with the sleeve of her pajamas. I need your help, she said. Anything. I want to sue him. For fraud. For the money. For all of it. I already talked to a lawyer. Patricia Hayes. She's ready to take the case. Michelle looked at me with something like gratitude mixed with exhaustion. Of course you did. Because you knew I'd need her eventually. I hoped you wouldn't, but I wanted to be prepared if you did. She managed a small, sad smile. I'm sorry, Mom, for not believing you, for pushing you away. You have nothing to apologize for. Yes, I do, but right now I just want to make him pay for what he did. Can we do that? I thought about Patricia's words, about civil litigation being expensive and slow and uncertain, but I also thought about Edith Marshall in that cold room, about my daughter's red eyes and broken voice, about Brandon Coleman spending $11,000 on his girlfriend while claiming he was helping his mother. Yes, I said. We can do that. We called Patricia at 9 a.m. By 10 a.m., we were in her office. By noon, we'd signed the papers. On March 1st, 2024, we filed the lawsuit. Green versus Coleman. Civil fraud. $25,000 plus damages. Court date, November 18th, 2024. The war had begun. Judge Kensington gavelled us back into session at 1:30 p.m. after the lunch recess. I'd spent the break in the courthouse cafeteria with Patricia, going over what was coming next. Michelle had gone outside for air. When she came back, her face was pale but determined. Edith had stayed in the courtroom, sitting in the back row in her navy blue coat, hands folded peacefully in her lap. The plaintiff may call its next witness, Judge Kensington said. Patricia stood. The plaintiff calls Amber Wright. The courtroom doors opened and every head turned. Amber Wright walked down the center aisle like she was heading to her own execution. Early 30s, dark hair pulled back severely from her face. No makeup, simple black dress and flats. She looked terrified. As she passed Brandon's table, he stared straight ahead, jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. She didn't look at him, kept her eyes on the witness stand. She was sworn in, sat down, gripped the armrests of the chair so hard her knuckles went white. Patricia approached her gently, like you would a scared animal. Ms. Wright, thank you for being here. I know this is difficult. Amber nodded, didn't speak. Can you tell the court how you know Brandon Coleman? We work together at Coldwell Banker Real Estate. Her voice was barely audible. The judge asked her to speak up. "We work together," she repeated, louder this time. "And at some point, did your professional relationship become personal?" "Yes." "When?" "July 2023. 18 months ago." I watched Michelle's face. She didn't flinch, just kept her eyes on Amber. "Ms. Wright, when you began your romantic relationship with Mr. Coleman, did you know he was married?" Amber's voice cracked. "No." "When did you find out?" "June of this year, 2024, when an investigator contacted me." "How did you react to learning this information?" Tears started sliding down Amber's face. "I was devastated. I'd been with him for almost a year. I thought—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "I thought we were building a future together." "Did Mr. Coleman ever mention his wife during the time you were together?" "Never. Everyone at the office thought he was single. He introduced me as his girlfriend at company events. The Christmas party, summer picnic, team dinners. He never wore a wedding ring." Patricia picked up the photograph of Amber wearing the diamond necklace. "Ms. Wright, is this you in this photograph?" Amber looked at it, nodded miserably. "Yes." "Can you describe what you're wearing?" "A diamond necklace." "Who gave it to you?" "Brandon." Her voice was almost a whisper. "When?" "January 15th, 2024. He said it was because he loved me, that he wanted me to have something beautiful." Patricia handed this photo to Judge Kensington, who studied it impassively. "Ms. Wright, in January 2024, did you take a trip with Mr. Coleman?" "Yes, to Aspen, January 14th through 18th. "Did he tell you why you were going?" "He said it was a surprise, a romantic getaway, that he wanted to celebrate our relationship." "Did he mention that the trip was paid for with money his wife had given him for his mother's medical care?" "Objection!" Brennan shot to his feet. "Assumes facts not in evidence. Sustained," Judge Kensington said. "Rephrase, Ms. Hayes." "Ms. Wright, were you aware of how Mr. Coleman was financing your trips and gifts?" "No. I assumed he was doing well in real estate. He always said business was good." "If you had known he was married, would you have accepted the necklace? Gone on the trip?" Amber looked directly at Michelle for the first time. Fresh tears streamed down her face. "Absolutely not. I would never—" Her voice broke. "I'm not that kind of person. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." "Thank you, Ms. Wright." Patricia's voice was gentle. "Why did you agree to testify today?" Amber wiped her eyes with a tissue someone had handed her. "Because I was lied to, too. And because she—" She gestured to Michelle. "Deserves to know the truth. Deserves to get her money back. Brandon lied to both of us, and that's wrong. No further questions." Brennan stood for cross-examination. I could see him calculating, trying to figure out how to attack this witness without looking like a monster. "Ms. Wright, you claim you didn't know Mr. Coleman was married, but you worked in the same office. Surely someone must have mentioned—" "No one knew. He told everyone he was single." "Convenient that everyone was supposedly fooled." "Objection," Patricia said. "Argumentative." "Sustained." Brennan tried a different approach. "You're testifying here today because you're angry at Mr. Coleman for ending your relationship, aren't you?" "I'm testifying because he lied to me, used me, spent money that wasn't his to impress me. Yes, I'm angry, but I'm more ashamed. Ashamed that I didn't see through him." "No further questions," Brennan said curtly, sitting down. Amber was excused. As she walked past Michelle's row, she paused. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." Michelle nodded once, didn't speak, but I saw something in her face soften, just slightly. Amber Wright wasn't the enemy. She was just another woman Brandon Coleman had lied to. "The plaintiff calls Edith Marshall." Edith stood slowly from the back row, smoothed down her navy blue coat, the one I'd bought her, the one her son had promised but never delivered. Walked with careful dignity down the aisle. She was sworn in, sat in the witness chair and folded her hands in her lap, looking small and frail but somehow unbreakable. Patricia approached her gently. "Mrs. Marshall, how are you feeling today?" "Nervous, but okay, dear. Thank you for asking." A few people in the gallery smiled. Even Judge Kensington's expression softened slightly. "Can you tell the court about your son, Brandon Coleman?" Edith's face transformed. Love and sadness mixed together. "Brandon is my only child. I raised him alone after his father left when he was 7. It was hard, but we managed. He was a good boy, smart, had big dreams. When did you last see your son in person? The courtroom went quiet. July of last year, 2023, 16 months ago. Has he called you? Once, last Christmas. We talked for about 5 minutes. He said he'd visit soon. Did he? No. Patricia pulled out medical records. Mrs. Marshall, in late 2023, did Brandon tell you he was raising money for your medical care? No, he didn't. Did he ever discuss your health needs with you? No. Did you receive any portion of the $25,000 that Brandon told his wife was for your care? No. Edith's voice was clear, firm. Not a penny. According to your doctor's records, you take 2 medications. Can you tell the court what they are? Lisinopril for high blood pressure and ibuprofen for my arthritis. How much do those medications cost per month? About $30. My Medicare covers most of it. Have you needed any specialized treatments or hospital care in the past year? No. Just my regular checkups every 3 months. Patricia showed her photos of her room at Pinewood. Is this where you live? Edith looked at the photos with something like shame on her face. Yes. Room 14 at Pinewood Care Center. How much is your rent there? $1,200 a month. And how do you pay for it? My Social Security. I get $1,420 a month. The math was simple enough for everyone in the courtroom to do. After rent, Edith had $220 a month for food, clothing, everything else. Patricia picked up a final photo. Mrs. Marshall, last Christmas did your son make you a promise? Edith's eyes filled with tears. Yes. I mentioned my winter coat was broken. The zipper doesn't work anymore. He said not to worry, that he'd buy me a new one, navy blue. He said he'd bring it the next time he visited. Did he ever buy you that coat? No. Who bought you the coat you're wearing today? Elena Green, Michelle's mother. Edith looked at me and I saw gratitude in her eyes. She came to visit me when my own son wouldn't. She listened to me, and she bought me the coat Brandon had promised. Patricia let that sit for a moment. No further questions. Brennan stood for cross-examination. He looked at this tiny, elderly woman and I saw him make a calculation, saw him decide how hard he could push without looking cruel. Mrs. Marshall, you love your son, don't you? Yes, very much. And you want what's best for him? Of course. Isn't it possible that Brandon did send you money, but you've forgotten? Memory can be unreliable at 77. My memory is just fine, young man. Edith's voice was sharp. I might be old, but I'm not confused. My son hasn't sent me money, hasn't visited, hasn't called except once. Those are facts, not faulty memories. A few people in the gallery actually chuckled. Brennan pressed on. Mrs. Marshall, do you feel abandoned by your son? Yes. The honesty of it was stunning. And that makes you angry with him? It makes me sad. Sad enough to lie to hurt him? Patricia stood. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is badgering the witness. Sustained. Mr. Brennan, rephrase or move on. Brennan looked at Edith, looked at the photo of her room, looked at Judge Kensington's expression, which had gone cold. No further questions. Edith stepped down from the witness stand. As she passed Brandon's table, she stopped. Brandon still wouldn't look at her. I still love you, Brandon, she said quietly. I always will. But what you did was wrong, and you need to make it right. Then she walked back to her seat in the gallery. The courtroom was absolutely silent. I looked at Brandon. For the first time all day, I saw a crack in his composure. His hands were shaking slightly. His jaw worked like he was trying not to cry. Good. Let him feel something. Let him understand what he'd done. The plaintiff calls Elena Green. My legs felt weak as I stood, but I made them carry me to the witness stand, raised my right hand, swore to tell the truth, sat down and looked out at the courtroom, at Michelle, who gave me an encouraging nod, at Edith, who smiled gently, at Patricia, who looked calm and confident, at Brandon, who finally met my eyes. I didn't look away. Patricia began. Mrs. Green, can you state your occupation for the court? I'm a registered nurse. I've worked at Denver General Hospital for 35 years. Are you married? I'm a widow. My husband Jerome passed away 6 years ago. Do you have children? One daughter, Michelle Coleman. I paused. Soon to be Michelle Green again, I hope. A few people smiled at that. Patricia walked me through my relationship with Michelle. with Brandon, with the discovery at Pinewood Care Center. What did you do when you learned Brandon had lied about his mother's condition? I told Michelle. She didn't want to believe it at first. She defended him. We had a terrible fight and she asked me to stay out of her marriage. But you didn't stop investigating? No, because I knew something was wrong. A mother knows. What happened next? Michelle hired her own investigator, discovered Brandon was having an affair with Amber Wright, discovered he'd spent thousands of dollars of her money on his girlfriend. When she confronted him, he admitted he'd lied about everything. And that's when she came to you for help? Yes, we filed this lawsuit together. Patricia nodded. Why did you buy Edith Marshall a winter coat? I looked at Edith. Because her son promised to and didn't. Because she's family, not by blood, but by choice. And because nobody should be cold when someone has the power to keep them warm. No further questions. Brennan stood. Here it comes. Mrs. Green, I'm sorry for your loss. Losing your husband must have been devastating. It was. And after Jerome died, Michelle became your primary focus, didn't she? My daughter has always been important to me. Important or essential, Mrs. Green? Isn't it true that after your husband died, you became emotionally dependent on Michelle? I kept my voice calm. We support each other. That's what families do. You call her multiple times a day, don't you? When our schedules allow. And when she married Brandon Coleman, that changed your relationship, didn't it? Suddenly she had someone else to confide in, someone else to depend on. Marriage is supposed to create a partnership you weren't part of anymore. That must have been difficult for you. I saw where he was going, tried to stay calm. It was an adjustment, but I was happy for her. Were you? Or were you threatened by Brandon, afraid of losing your daughter's attention? Patricia stood. Objection. Speculation. Overruled. The witness may answer. I looked at Brennan. I wasn't threatened by Brandon. I was concerned about him. There's a difference. Concerned? Or looking for reasons to dislike him so you could drive him away? I had reasons to be concerned. My instincts were correct. Your instincts? Brennan's voice dripped with condescension. Mrs. Green, isn't this lawsuit really about you wanting your daughter back? About punishing a man for the crime of marrying her? The courtroom held its breath. I stood up. Patricia looked startled. Judge Kensington raised an eyebrow but didn't tell me to sit. Mr. Brennan, I said, my voice steady and clear. You want to know why I'm here? I'll tell you. I pulled the navy blue scarf from around my neck. Edith's scarf, the one she'd given me. I'm here because I'm a nurse. I've spent 35 years watching people lie to cover up mistakes, lie to avoid responsibility, lie because the truth was uncomfortable. I held up the scarf. But eventually the truth comes out. In test results, in symptoms that can't be hidden, in damage that can't be undone. I looked at Michelle, at Edith, at the gallery where Amber sat in the back row. Brandon Coleman lied to his wife, lied to his mother, lied to Amber Wright. And he thought he'd get away with it because we were all just women who loved him too much to fight back. I turned to look directly at Brandon, but he was wrong. I sat back down. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Brennan stared at me, opened his mouth, closed it. No further questions. Judge Kensington looked at me for a long moment. The witness is excused. I walked back to my seat. Michelle was crying. Edith was smiling. And I knew whatever happened next, I'd said what needed to be said. Judge Kensington heard closing arguments. Brennan's was full of legal terminology and accusations about bitter in-laws. Patricia's was simple. The defendant committed fraud. The evidence proves it. The plaintiff deserves justice. At 4:15 p.m., the judge spoke. I'll issue my ruling tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Court is adjourned. That night I couldn't sleep. Michelle stayed at my house. We sat up talking until 2 a.m., then lay in the dark, each lost in our own thoughts. The next morning we arrived at the courthouse at 8:30 a.m. At 9 sharp, Judge Kensington entered. I've reviewed all evidence and testimony, she began. This court finds that Brandon Coleman did obtain $25,000 from Michelle Coleman through fraudulent misrepresentation of his mother's medical needs. Michelle grabbed my hand. The court orders Brandon Coleman to repay Michelle Coleman the sum of $25,000 plus statutory interest from January 3, 2024. My heart soared. Additionally, the court awards damages in the amount of $15,000 for emotional distress caused by the defendant's deliberate and malicious fraud. The courtroom erupted in whispers. $15,000 in damages. We hadn't expected that. Total judgment. $40,000 plus interest. Mr. Coleman, you have 90 days to pay. Failure to comply will result in wage garnishment. Judge Kensington looked at me. Mrs. Green, your daughter is fortunate to have you. This court is adjourned. The gavel fell. Michelle collapsed into my arms, sobbing with relief. We'd won. 3 months later, February 2025. Brandon paid every penny. $40,000. Michelle used part of it for a condo down payment. Gave $5,000 to Edith. Edith moved to Sunrise Assisted Living. Warm, clean. We visit every Sunday. Michelle is healing. Therapy. Support groups. Even went on a date last month. Me? I went back to night shifts at Denver General. But I'm different now. I'm not just a nurse. Not just a widow. Not just a mother. I'm a woman who stood up in a courtroom and refused to let a man get away with hurting the people I love. People ask if it was worth it. I tell them, Brandon Coleman thought I was just a confused old woman. The judge disagreed. And that's all that matters.